Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked to learn. Mike had learned that sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the most, but also that strength often comes from unexpected places. His background in cybersecurity had taught him to look for evidence, to stay calm, to think strategically. Those skills had saved him from losing everything. 1 year after the confrontation at the county clerk's office, Mike sat on the balcony of his new apartment, watching the sunset. His phone buzzed, a message from his lawyer sharing news about Lisa. She'd pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was serving probation. She was working as a waitress now, her real estate career forever ended. Mike put the phone down without responding. The past was the past, and he'd learned to let it stay there. His new life was different from the one he'd planned, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you to what you actually need. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors he and Lisa had once debated for their living room walls. But now those colors just meant another day was ending and a new one would begin tomorrow. And tomorrow, like every day since he'd stopped the fraud attempt, would be his to shape however he chose. As night fell over the city, Mike smiled to himself. His story wasn't about losing a house or a marriage. It was about standing up for what's right, about facing betrayal with dignity, about rebuilding a life from broken pieces. And maybe, just maybe, that was a better story than the one he originally planned to live. The weeks following the confrontation at the county clerk's office unfolded like chapters in a book Mike never wanted to read. The beautiful home he and Lisa had built together now felt too big, too empty, filled with echoes of broken promises and shattered dreams. But life, as it always does, moved forward. The legal consequences came swiftly. The state real estate board launched an immediate investigation after receiving the evidence. They weren't happy about licensed agents attempting property fraud. It made the whole profession look bad. Lisa's real estate license was suspended pending a full investigation. Robert, trying to save himself, claimed he was just following Lisa's lead, but the emails proved they were equal partners in the scheme. Their neighbors, the ones who'd agreed to buy the house after the fraudulent transfer, came by one evening to apologize. They looked smaller somehow, embarrassed by their role in the plot. "We never thought about it being illegal," the wife admitted, wringing her hands. Lisa made it sound so simple, just a creative way to handle a property transfer. Mike accepted their apology but declined their dinner invitation. Some bridges, once broken, stay that way. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Lisa, facing professional ruin and possible criminal charges, didn't contest anything. Her carefully planned scheme had backfired spectacularly, leaving her with nothing but regrets and legal bills. Robert, true to form, disappeared from her life the moment things got difficult. Last Mike heard, he'd moved to another state, probably looking for easier marks for his real estate schemes. One sunny Saturday morning, as Mike was sorting through old photos in the living room, his lawyer called with unexpected news. The district attorney's office had decided to pursue criminal charges, not just against Lisa and Robert, but against several other people involved in their previous property schemes. It turned out their plan to steal Mike's house wasn't their first attempt at real estate fraud, just their most ambitious. "You did the right thing," his lawyer told him. "Your case exposed a whole network of fraudulent property deals. They were targeting other homeowners too, people who might have lost everything if you hadn't stopped them." The news should have made Mike feel better, but victory tasted bittersweet. He walked through the house, touching the walls they'd painted together, remembering how Lisa had insisted on the perfect shade of blue for the kitchen, how they argued about the placement of every light fixture, how they dreamed of growing old in this home. But dreams change, and sometimes they have to break completely before you can build new ones. After much thought, Mike decided to sell the house, legally at market value, through a reputable agent. He couldn't stay there anymore, surrounded by memories of betrayal. The sale went quickly. Their renovations had made it one of the most desirable properties in the neighborhood. The young family that bought it reminded Mike of himself and Lisa years ago. They had big plans for the garden, ideas for updating the kitchen, dreams of raising children in those rooms. As he handed them the keys, he didn't tell them about the house's recent history. Let them create their own stories, their own memories, untainted by what had happened before. With the sale completed, Mike moved to a smaller place across town. It was modern, with clean lines and blank walls, nothing like the warm, lived-in feel of his old home. But it was his, free from painful memories and betrayal. He filled it with new furniture, new art, new hopes. The final piece of closure came in the form of a letter from the State Real Estate Board. They'd completed their investigation and permanently revoked Lisa's license. Robert's too. The letter thanked Mike for bringing the fraud attempt to their attention, noting that his evidence had helped them identify and stop similar schemes across the state. "I trusted you," Mike said quietly. "With our home, with our dreams, with everything we built together. And you were going to throw it all away for what?" A quick profit and a new start with him. He gestured at the door, but Robert was already gone, proving what Mike had suspected all along. When things got tough, he'd save himself first. The county clerk had returned, accompanied by her supervisor. They were clearly anxious to resolve the situation. Mike's lawyer handled it smoothly, ensuring all the proper documentation was filed, making sure there was an official record of the attempted fraud. As they left the building, Mike took one last look at his wife, the woman he'd loved, the woman who'd planned to betray him, the woman who now sat alone on a hard office chair, staring at the scattered papers that proved her guilt. Part of him wanted to comfort her, a habit from years of marriage. But that part was overshadowed by the memory of all the lies, all the secret plans, all the betrayal. Outside, the morning sun was bright, almost too bright. Mike squinted, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. His home was safe, the fraud prevented, justice served. But the cost had been his marriage, his trust, and the future he'd thought they'd share. His lawyer touched his arm gently. "You did the right thing," she said. "Not everyone has the strength to stand up to betrayal like this, to gather evidence instead of acting on emotion, to let justice take its course." Mike nodded, watching Lisa's reflection in the office window, still sitting alone where Robert had left her. Sometimes winning feels a lot like losing, he thought. But at least he kept his dignity, his home, and his self-respect. And right now, that had to be enough. The county clerk's office opened at 8 a.m. sharp. Mike sat in his parked car across the street, watching the morning unfold like a play he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. His lawyer stood near the entrance, pretending to check her phone. They'd chosen their positions carefully, close enough to act quickly, far enough not to be noticed. At 8:43, exactly as predicted, Lisa's silver SUV pulled into the parking lot. Robert's black sedan followed a minute later, parking 2 spaces away, still playing it careful, still thinking they were being clever. Mike watched them walk inside, noticing how Lisa straightened her blazer, always the professional, even when committing fraud. "They're here," he texted his lawyer, who nodded almost imperceptibly and followed them inside. Mike gave it 5 minutes, counting each second, remembering all the lies, all the secret meetings, all the betrayal that had led to this moment. Inside, the clerk's office was quiet, just a few people handling their morning business. Lisa and Robert stood at the main counter, spreading out their documents. Mike could see the familiar paper that would transfer his home for $1, the document they'd planned so carefully. His wife was smiling, probably congratulating herself on how smoothly everything was going. Then his lawyer stepped forward, legal papers in hand. "I have an emergency injunction," she announced clearly, placing the document on the counter. "Any property transfers involving this address are blocked by court order." The look on Lisa's face was something Mike would never forget. The color drained from her cheeks as she read the court order, her hands trembling slightly as she realized what it meant. Robert took a step back, his confident smile replaced by something closer to panic. "What is this?" Lisa's voice shook. There must be some mistake. "The only mistake," Mike said, finally stepping forward, "was thinking you could steal our home and get away with it." The clerk, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama, quietly excused herself. Mike laid out his own folder on the counter, emails, bank statements, recorded conversations. Each piece of evidence he placed down was another nail in the coffin of their scheme. "How did you?" Lisa started, but her voice trailed off as she saw the dates on the emails. Her secret account, not so secret after all. The conversations with Robert about property transfers and hidden profits, all carefully documented. Robert, showing his true colors, was already backing away. "Lisa, we need to talk to our lawyers," he said, his voice urgent. But Mike wasn't done. The state real estate board might be interested in how two licensed agents plan to abuse power of attorney for fraud, he said calmly. And our neighbors might want to know the legal consequences of participating in property fraud before they agree to buy stolen homes. Lisa's professional composure cracked. You don't understand, she pleaded. We were going to split everything fairly. You would have gotten your share. My share? Mike's laugh held no humor. Of my own house? The one we built together? The one you were planning to steal for $1? Robert had reached the door. Lisa, don't say another word. This is now a legal matter. His face had lost its usual smooth confidence, replaced by barely concealed fear. Everything was falling apart, and he was already planning his escape. You're right about one thing, Mike's lawyer stepped forward. This is absolutely a legal matter. My client has enough evidence to pursue criminal charges for attempted real estate fraud, not to mention ethics violations that could cost both of you your licenses. Lisa sank into a nearby chair, the weight of her actions finally hitting her. All her careful planning, all the secret meetings, all the clever manipulations, none of it had worked. Instead of walking out of here as the owner of $1 million property, she was facing professional ruin and possible criminal charges. But tonight, Mike would do what he'd done for weeks, act normal, eat dinner with his wife, and pretend he didn't know what was coming. He'd learned that sometimes the best defense isn't just having evidence, it's knowing exactly when to use it. As he unlocked the front door, he heard Lisa on the phone in the kitchen, probably talking to Robert about their plans for tomorrow. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, her perfectly planned scheme would collapse like a house of cards. And Mike, for the first time in weeks, allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes justice comes quietly, dressed in legal papers and emergency injunctions, rather than dramatic confrontations. Mike sat in the law office, surrounded by certificates and leather-bound books, watching his attorney flip through the evidence he'd gathered. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with gray-streaked hair, had been reviewing the documents for over an hour, occasionally nodding or making notes. The silence was making Mike nervous, but years of handling cybersecurity crises had taught him to wait patiently. This, she finally said, holding up a particularly damning email, is exactly what we needed. She spread the papers across her desk like she was dealing cards. You've done something remarkable here. Most people in your situation act on emotion and tip their hand too early. But you've built an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming when laid out together. Bank statements showing systematic transfer of assets, emails discussing the fraudulent property scheme, documents proving Lisa had been preparing to abuse her power of attorney, even recordings of conversations Mike had legally obtained when they were having discussions in public places. The thing about real estate fraud, the lawyer explained, pulling out a yellow legal pad, is that it leaves a paper trail. Your wife and Robert probably thought they were being clever with their $1 sale scheme. But what they're attempting is textbook fraud, both against you and potentially against the state. She outlined their counter-strategy. First, they'd file for an emergency injunction to prevent any property transfers. The judge would likely grant it given the evidence of imminent fraud. Then they'd revoke Lisa's power of attorney, something that should have been done the moment Mike suspected misconduct. The real estate angle is what makes this interesting, the lawyer continued, warming to her subject. Your wife isn't just violating her duties as a spouse. As a licensed real estate agent, she has a fiduciary responsibility. What she's planning isn't just morally wrong, it could cost her her license. Mike felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. He hadn't wanted any of this, but he couldn't let them steal everything he'd worked for. What about Robert? He asked. And the neighbors who agreed to buy the house. The lawyer's smile was grim. They're all part of a conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Robert could lose his license too. And your neighbors? They'll probably back out quickly once they realize they could face legal consequences. People tend to get honest real fast when they realize they might be named in a fraud lawsuit. They spent the next few hours preparing legal documents, emergency motions to prevent property transfer, revocation of power of attorney, asset freezes. Each document felt like another brick in a wall of protection around his home and his rights. Here's what's going to happen, the lawyer said, checking her calendar. Tomorrow morning, I'll file these papers first thing. The moment Lisa or Robert try to register that fraudulent transfer, they'll hit a legal brick wall. But we need to be ready for their reaction. She pulled out another form. This is for a restraining order, not against physical contact, but against any financial transactions involving your joint assets. Given the evidence of ongoing fraud attempts, the judge should grant it immediately. Mike stared at the stack of papers, each one representing another step in dismantling his wife's betrayal. Will this really stop them? He asked. Better than that, the lawyer replied, her eyes sharp. It will catch them in the act. They'll walk into that county clerk's office thinking they're about to pull off their clever scheme. Instead, they'll walk straight into a legal trap. She handed him a business card with her cell phone number written on the back. Keep this with you. The moment they make their move, things will happen fast. They might try to access other accounts or transfer other assets once they realize their main plan has failed. But we'll be ready. As Mike drove home that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors he and Lisa had once debated for their living room walls. The folder of legal documents sat heavy in his briefcase, each page representing another crack in the life they built together. He pulled into their driveway, looking at the house they poured so much love into. Tomorrow, everything would change. Lisa would discover that her carefully laid plans were about to crumble. Robert would learn that sometimes the easiest-looking con turns out to be the most dangerous, and their neighbors would realize that agreeing to participate in fraud, even peripherally, has consequences. The truth came together on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that should have found Mike and Lisa working in their garden or planning their next home improvement project. Instead, Mike sat alone in his car outside the Golden Gate Cafe, watching his wife walk in for what she'd claimed was a meeting with potential buyers. He hadn't planned to follow her that day. But that morning, he noticed something odd about her laptop. She'd left her email open, logged into her secret account. Maybe she was getting careless, or maybe she thought he'd already left for his weekly gym session. Either way, it was the break he'd been waiting for. The emails told a story that made his blood run cold. Lisa and Robert had been planning this for months, but it was more elaborate than Mike had imagined. They weren't just planning to sell the house. They'd created an entire scheme that would leave Mike with nothing while they walked away with everything he'd worked for. Their plan was like something out of a crime novel, but with real estate laws instead of guns. First, Lisa would use her power of attorney, the one Mike had given her years ago when he traveled for work, to transfer their house to Robert for just $1. On paper, it would look like a distressed sale, the kind that sometimes happens in families facing financial troubles. The next part was clever in a way that made Mike's stomach turn. They'd wait 30 days, just long enough for the transfer to seem legitimate. Then Robert would put the house on the market at its real value, $1.2 million. They'd already lined up a buyer, another real estate agent who'd play along in exchange for a cut of the profits. Mike watched through his car window as Robert arrived at the cafe, 10 minutes after Lisa. He was carrying a briefcase today, looking more like a businessman than a real estate agent. Mike had gotten good at reading lips over the past few weeks, a skill he'd picked up during his surveillance. Through the cafe window, he could see them huddled over papers, pointing at documents, their heads close together. He didn't need to read their lips to know what they were discussing. He'd found the draft contracts in Lisa's email. The money would be moved through 3 different accounts to hide its path. By the time Mike figured out what had happened, the house would be sold, the money gone, and Lisa would serve him divorce papers. She'd probably counted on him being too embarrassed about being conned to fight back. The real knife in the heart was the buyer they'd lined up. It was one of their neighbors, the quiet couple from 3 houses down who'd always complimented their renovations. They'd been in on it too, agreeing to buy the house at market value once Robert had it in his name. Their part in the deal would net them a hefty discount, all while helping to make the whole scheme look legitimate. Mike watched as Lisa laughed at something Robert said, her hand resting on his arm. They looked like any other couple having coffee, not 2 people plotting to steal a man's home and life savings. Through the window, he could see Robert pull out more papers, pointing to different sections, probably explaining the final details of their plan. The irony wasn't lost on Mike. Every improvement they'd made to the house, every weekend spent painting and renovating, had just made it a more valuable target. The garden Lisa had insisted on upgrading last spring, the new kitchen counters she'd chosen, All of it would soon line someone else's pockets if he didn't stop them. He checked his phone, where an email from his lawyer sat unopened. He'd sent over all the evidence last night, the bank records, the secret emails, the property documents, everything. His lawyer's response would tell him if he had enough to stop this before it went too far. But watching them through the cafe window, seeing how comfortable they were in their deception, Mike realized something important. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about justice. About making sure that people who thought they could play with others' lives and dreams didn't get away with it. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Documents received. Everything we need. Ready when you are. Mike started his car, taking one last look at the cafe where his wife and her boyfriend were still bent over their papers, planning how to steal his dream house. They thought they had planned for everything, but they hadn't planned for him. As he drove away, he felt oddly calm. Tomorrow, they would try to file their fraudulent property transfer. Tomorrow, they would learn that sometimes the person you think you're tricking has been one step ahead of you all along. Tomorrow, the real story would begin. Tomorrow, he would take the final step in his investigation. But tonight, he allowed himself one moment of pure grief for the life he'd thought they had. Then, like he'd done every night for the past weeks, he locked those feelings away. Because he knew that what would happen next would require a clear head and a steady hand. Mike had always told his cybersecurity clients that emotion was the enemy of good investigation. Stay calm, stay methodical, document everything. Now he had to follow his own advice, even as his world crumbled around him. Every morning he got up, kissed Lisa goodbye, and pretended everything was normal. But his real work began the moment she left the house. His first step was creating a detailed timeline. In his home office, he pinned a large calendar to the wall behind his computer monitor where Lisa wouldn't see it. Red dots marked her late meetings. Blue dots tracked unusual bank transfers. Green dots showed Robert's appearances at their local coffee shop, always on days when Lisa claimed to have early client meetings. The pattern was impossible to miss. What had started as occasional coffee meetings had evolved into long lunches, then evening appointments that stretched later and later. Mike cross-referenced everything with their joint credit card statements. Lisa had been careful, but not careful enough. There were small slips. A dinner charge at an expensive restaurant on a night she'd claimed to be showing houses, a hotel parking fee when she'd said she was at a real estate seminar. The money trail told its own story. Mike discovered Lisa had been moving their savings bit by bit, sliding funds between accounts like pieces on a chessboard. She'd opened not just one secret account, but 3, each at different banks. The transfers were clever, small enough to avoid attention, spread out enough to seem routine. But together, they added up to nearly half of their liquid assets. One rainy afternoon, while backing up their shared computer, Mike found a folder of photos he'd never seen before. His hands shook as he clicked through them. Lisa and Robert at various properties, standard real estate shots at first, but then more personal ones. Them laughing together in what looked like a restaurant. A selfie taken in front of a sunset. The final photo made his heart stop. Robert standing on their front porch, arm around Lisa's waist, both of them smiling like they owned the place. The house paperwork was the final piece. Mike used his lunch breaks to visit the county records office, carefully tracing recent property transactions involving Robert. He found a pattern: buy low, sell high, all perfectly legal but with a twist. Each deal involved properties that had been briefly transferred between family members or business partners at token prices before being sold at market value. It was a scheme as old as real estate itself. Transfer property for $1 to avoid certain taxes and regulations, then flip it for profit. But this time, they planned to do it with his house, his and Lisa's dream home that they'd built together. The draft paperwork he'd found wasn't just a random document. It was part of a larger plan. Mike started recording everything. He set up a secure cloud storage account that only he could access. Every suspicious email, every bank statement, every property record, all carefully organized and time-stamped. He took photos of documents in Lisa's office, making sure to leave everything exactly as he found it. His years in cybersecurity had taught him the importance of having backups of backups. The hardest part was maintaining his composure during dinner conversations. Lisa would talk about her day, mentioning clients and properties, carefully omitting certain meetings and phone calls. Mike would listen, noting each lie by omission, each carefully crafted half-truth. He'd watch her check her phone under the table, seeing the slight smile she couldn't quite hide when certain messages came through. One evening, he overheard a phone conversation through the bathroom window. Lisa was in the garden again, speaking in hushed tones. "The paperwork is almost ready," she was saying. "Once it's done, we can move fast. He'll never know what hit him until it's too late." That night, Mike lay awake long after Lisa had fallen asleep. The moonlight filtered through their bedroom window, casting shadows on the wall they'd painted together years ago. He thought about all the dreams they'd shared in this room, all the plans they'd made. Now those same walls held different secrets, darker ones. But Mike had secrets of his own now. In his desk drawer, sealed in a manila envelope, was everything he'd discovered. Bank statements, photos, property records, emails, text messages, a complete record of betrayal, all meticulously documented and organized. He'd learned long ago that in the digital age, nothing truly disappears. Every action leaves a trace, every plan creates a pattern, and every betrayal leaves evidence. It started with a forgotten phone charger. One ordinary Tuesday morning, Mike had rushed back home from his office to grab it, only to find his laptop struggling to sync their shared cloud storage. As he waited for the spinning wheel to stop, a flood of unfamiliar emails populated his screen. At first, he almost clicked away. Lisa's real estate work always generated countless messages, but something caught his eye. The sender's name was Robert, Lisa's new colleague at the real estate firm. Mike had met him briefly at the company's Christmas party 6 months ago, tall, confident, with the kind of polished smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials. Nothing remarkable about him, except for the way he dominated Lisa's recent conversations. Robert closed this deal. Robert knew about that property. Robert had amazing ideas for marketing strategies. The email started professionally enough. Property listings, market analyses, client feedback, standard real estate talk that made Mike's eyes glaze over. But as he scrolled further, the tone shifted. Inside jokes crept in, personal comments, references to coffee meetings that had nothing to do with work. One message mentioned how much Robert had enjoyed their private showing of the lakefront property. Mike's hands felt cold as he read more. Between discussions of property values and market trends were fragments of a different conversation. "Miss our lunch already," one message read. "Can't stop thinking about yesterday," said another. The timestamps revealed late-night exchanges, messages sent during weekends when Lisa had claimed to be showing houses to out-of-town clients. His AT security background kicked in automatically. Mike created secure backups of everything, carefully documenting dates and times. He didn't want to believe what he was seeing, but 15 years in cybersecurity had taught him that data doesn't lie. People do. The next few weeks became a painful exercise in pretense. During the day, Mike went through the motions at work, designing security systems to protect other people's secrets, while his own life felt increasingly unsecured. At night, he lay awake beside Lisa, listening to her breathe, wondering if she was dreaming about their life together or someone else. He noticed things he'd been too busy to see before. How Lisa always placed her phone face down now. The new passwords on her personal laptop. The way she'd step outside to take certain calls, claiming the reception was better in the garden. The same garden where they'd once spent whole weekends planting flowers and planning their future. The paper trail grew longer. Mike discovered Lisa had opened a separate bank account 3 months ago. Small transfers at first, then larger sums, all carefully timed to avoid attention. She'd been researching property laws too. Her browser history revealed countless searches about real estate transfers between spouses, power of attorney limitations, and state regulations about property sales. One rainy evening, while Lisa was at another client meeting, Mike found himself standing in her home office. They'd designed this room together, choosing the perfect shade of blue for the walls, installing built-in bookshelves to hold her real estate guides and industry awards. Now it felt like enemy territory. The cabinet where she kept important documents was slightly ajar, unusual for Lisa, who was typically meticulous about security. Inside, buried beneath tax records and insurance papers, he found it, draft paperwork for their house's sale. The details make his stomach turn. The proposed buyer's name was blank, but the terms were clear enough. A token amount. $1. The kind of price you'd use in a private arrangement where the real payment happened elsewhere. Mike carefully replaced everything exactly as he found it. Walking back through their beautiful home, the home they'd poured their hearts into, each room felt different now. The kitchen where they'd danced while painting the walls, the living room where they'd hosted countless dinner parties, the bedroom where they'd shared their dreams. Every happy memory now cast a shadow of doubt. That night, when Lisa came home smelling of unfamiliar cologne, Mike pretended to be asleep. His mind was already racing, forming plans, considering angles. If there's one thing his years in cybersecurity had taught him, it was this: when you discover a breach, you don't confront it immediately. First, you gather evidence, you monitor, you prepare. And most importantly, you make sure that when you finally do act, you're holding all the cards. Because in his experience, people who think they're being clever often make the biggest mistakes. Lisa might have been an expert at selling houses, but Mike was an expert at protecting things of value. And he was just getting started. The two-story colonial house on Maple Avenue stood as a testament to love, hard work, and broken dreams. 5 years ago, when Mike and Lisa first drove past the for sale sign, the property was nothing more than a weathered structure with peeling paint and a wildly overgrown garden. Most people would have driven right by, but Lisa, being a real estate agent, had always been able to see the potential hiding beneath worn-out facades. "Just imagine what we could do with this place," she had whispered, squeezing Mike's hand as they stood in the weed-filled backyard during their first viewing. The price was well below their budget, mainly because the house needed extensive renovations. But that's exactly what made it perfect for them, a blank canvas for their dreams. Mike still remembered the day they got the keys. Lisa had jumped into his arms, nearly knocking him over with excitement. That weekend, they had camped out in the empty living room with nothing but sleeping bags, takeout pizza, and a bottle of cheap wine, planning their future until sunrise. They would host Thanksgiving dinners here, raise their children in these rooms, grow old on the wraparound porch they planned to build. The transformation began slowly. Every weekend, Mike would wake up at dawn, put on his work clothes, and tackle another project. He learned everything from YouTube videos and online forums, how to replace rotting floorboards, install new windows, and even rebuild the entire kitchen from scratch. His colleagues at the tech company where he worked as a systems analyst started calling him Bob the Builder, but Mike didn't mind. Every splinter, every bruised thumb, every exhausted muscle was worth it. Lisa contributed her own expertise, using her real estate knowledge to make smart decisions about which upgrades would add the most value. She spent countless hours researching design trends, hunting for deals on high-end materials, and networking with reliable contractors for the jobs they couldn't handle themselves. Her eye for detail transformed their home into something straight out of a magazine, the kind of place that made visitors pause in the doorway, struck by its perfect blend of classic charm and modern comfort. As the months turned into years, the house evolved alongside their marriage. The crisp white exterior with navy blue shutters became a landmark in the neighborhood. The once dead lawn transformed into a lush garden where butterflies danced among Lisa's carefully chosen perennials. The kitchen, with its marble countertops and custom cabinets, became the heart of their home where they hosted dinner parties that lasted late into the night. Their investment paid off beyond their wildest dreams. Property values in the area had steadily climbed, and their renovations had tripled the house's worth. Neighbors often stopped by to compliment their work, and Lisa proudly used photos of their home in her real estate portfolio. She even landed several high-profile clients who wanted to recreate the same magic in their own properties. But lately, something has shifted. The house felt different, emptier somehow. Lisa's schedule at the real estate office grew increasingly demanding. The market was hot, she explained, requiring longer hours and more weekend showings. Their shared dinners became rare, replaced by quick texts about leftovers in the fridge. The garden Mike had built for her started showing signs of neglect, weeds sprouting between the flowers she no longer had time to tend. Mike tried to be understanding. Real estate was cyclical after all, and it made sense to make hay while the sun shone. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The way Lisa's phone would suddenly go silent when he entered the room. How she'd started taking personal calls in the backyard, speaking in hushed tones. The mysterious late-night meetings with clients that never seemed to result in actual sales. One evening, as Mike sat alone on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, he realized their dream house had become more of a museum, beautiful but lifeless, preserving memories of happier times while the present slipped away. He couldn't have known then that this quiet moment of reflection was the calm before a storm that would shake their carefully built world to its very foundation. Little did he know that behind the perfect facade of their dream home, a betrayal was taking shape, one that would test not just their marriage, but everything Mike thought he knew about trust, love, and the true meaning of home.